Unboxing a pair of Vivobarefoot Primus Lite 3. This is the box. It's a very nice box actually. And these are the Primus Lite 3. You get two of them because you have 2 feet. And now let's take a look at them. In the box is nothing else, as you can see. These are fairly long, so you need to kind of find a way either to use something like this, or you can also use knots and knots and knots and then have them disappear basically, or just loosen them up until they look like this. Now if we take a look here, what we find in here are 2 of these, which you can use maybe to straighten out your other shoes or just throw into the paper trash. Now on the soles, what we can see is that there are these riffled things. Over time, these things tend to disappear. So recently, there was ice on the streets, and with shoes like these, you better not go onto the streets when there is ice. But apart from these 2 days where there was actually, you could almost ice skate on the streets, something like this actually works quite fine. It just doesn't work as fine as having an actual profile on your feet. Now, since these are barefoot shoes, I think these are just trying to emulate what it would feel like if you would be barefoot on a certain ground. And you have to keep in mind that this might be even an improvement. So therefore, having something like this is closer to barefoot, even though it sometimes means that you don't have as much of a grip. Especially if you are biking and it's raining and it's kind of slippery, you really have to pay attention with these shoes. So this is something you have to maybe to keep in mind when buying one of these. What we also find is this very active breathing layer here, which is not really waterproof. So if you are in winter and you go somewhere, then if snow comes onto here, then it might eventually melt and get kind of wet in the shoe. But in general, this is also something you just adapt to. You just adapt to your feet being not dry all the time, but sometimes wet if outside is also wet. So this is something you just have to keep in mind. Also, if there is something like water on the ground and you step into it, as soon as the water reaches at least this height, you are kind of screwed. The same is true for the side here, this side here. As you can see, you can slightly see my fingers through basically the mesh here. So the mesh is really, really thin actually. And this is actually kind of a nice feeling, because there is also this effect if you have cool limbs, so your hands and your feet are cool, then what this means also is that your mental and also your physical performance seemingly is a little bit higher and you can endure a little bit longer. Not so much the performance itself, but much more the endurance, so you can do more reps in the gym. And this is something I really found true. Not that I have actual data on it, but just anecdotally, I think this is kind of something that helps me in summer at least stay a little bit more fresh if my feet are also on the cooler side. Now, we do have these laces, and these laces, as I said already, are quite long. So what I did, as you can see on these shoes, I just widened them out. And this is actually a tactic that I will now apply to these as well. So what you have to keep in mind is that you want to have them both symmetrical. So therefore you don't want to pull one side more than the other. So as this length goes down here, you actually just want to pull and push, but you probably have done something like this already in your life. Therefore I will just skip it. Now, what you also have to keep in mind that these do have 2 different uses. So this is a shoe that has kind of this bound up here, and in general, therefore, is a little bit slimmer. Why is this the case? Because these are my shoes I wear for outside, but not only for outside, but also for running. What I did in the beginning with these shoes is that I tied them looser and then I tied them tighter whenever I went for a run. But this is not something that's really practical, so therefore after quite some time I realized I needed 2 pairs of shoes anyway. Also, I usually wear shoes inside sometimes because it just gives me a feeling of more being in an office kind of situation compared to not. Now, therefore, these shoes also have a different look to them. I think these look more like sneaker shoes, even though they of course are completely worn out at this point in time and already have holes in them, which makes them also kind of impractical, at least in winter. Maybe not in summer so much, but at least in winter. What you also can see is if you're barefoot in here, your feet. If you have socks in there, which are black, then it doesn't really matter that much. I have this shoe now already on this length here, and this is probably the length I will leave it. This is kind of a precautionary purchase for me. Why? Because these will eventually break down. I'm using these now for indoors only, and this is something also I thought a little bit about. If I am getting these shoes new, and I actually got them new only a few months ago, and this is how they look like after a few months of running and using them basically as my primary outside shoe, then if I have these and I still continue using these outside, then of course the teardown on these older shoes is bigger compared to the newer shoes. It's not that it's bigger, it is just that the same absolute amount of teardown has a bigger relative effect on these. So this means that a little bit, let's just say there are 100 units of teardown, you can tear them down and then they are broken. Additional 10 units on this shoe might make the shoe completely inoperable, whereas additional 10 units on this shoe just make this shoe 10 units less of this shoe. What this means is that eventually there comes a point at which it makes maybe sense to switch your outdoor shoes to your indoor shoes. Now, because of the less teardown that occurs, if you just wear shoes inside, there's not that much happening. Now, these again are the newer ones, and as you also can see, inside we have a layer, and this is actually a sole, and this sole is now black in the newer shoes. In the Primus Lite 2 it was also greenish, and in other shoes it also has other colors. So now this is something I usually tend to take out. In the beginning I had it in, and it also acts as an additional insulation, so it is a little bit warmer, especially in summer. If I, for example, have, these are my running shoes, and if I have not the sole in, or in the beginning I had the sole in all the time, and then I took it out and I realized the shoe again is much cooler and much more closer to a barefoot shoe. But what this also means is that your posture again needs to adapt even more. So your bones and your muscles and so on and so forth have to carry even more of the different impacts that the environment actually gives to you. And if you still have a running posture or a walking posture that's like this, then that's probably not something you are really looking forward to. Therefore, having, at least in the beginning, an additional layer of insulation, and again also preventing the stress from impacting your foot and your posture too much, is maybe something that's useful. But what I found eventually, that I got comfortable also with running without these soles, and therefore I also took them out, and I also will take them out in these new shoes. In total I actually have now 4 pairs of barefoot shoes. These are basically my winter shoes. These are the Magna Trail 2, and these are very nice shoes. They also look very nice. I think they also have kind of a stylish feeling to them, you could say. The Primus Lites sometimes look good, so these shoes I would say look like really nice sneakers actually, apart from the fact that they bend obviously. So they would look better like this, but over time they tend to bend upwards because a barefoot shoe is usually a little bit bigger, at least with the Vivobarefoots. What this means is that you bend these shoes here all the time, and therefore a shoe eventually looks like this, which is a look that is not that nice. Again here, the shoe also looks a little bit different. I think these do not look as nice, but of course this is kind of due to the fact that these are my running shoes also, not only my outside shoes. If these were my outside shoes, then I would wear it like this, with the style of the laces like this all the time. Keep in mind, this is the same length because it's the same model of the shoe. And then again, I have these newer ones. So coming back to these newer ones, I will now take out the second sole of the second shoe. And these are my spare ones, as I said already, until these ones are gone, or I will use them if the other ones are not usable anymore. And then again, I will switch these to my outdoor shoes and the other one to my indoor shoes. Now, additionally, is there something to be said additionally? What I do have is a shoe that is made out of a few recycled materials, It is a shoe that is basically made from plastic almost entirely. It's not a leather shoe, so this also means I do not know if the shoe is entirely vegan. I just looked it up and seemingly yes. An additional note maybe, if you're new to this, then in the beginning you might ask yourself all the time whether this is the wrong shoe size. So I usually had size 41 over the last years. Sometimes I had a size 42, but these were usually a little bit too big. What also is an effect, if this is your foot, in the beginning your foot looks maybe like this. But as your foot begins to develop again a little bit more and also develop muscles and so on and so forth, and proper posture, it actually probably looks more like this and maybe even more like this, because this is just a more advantageous posture in order to dampen more impact. Also, if there is a little bit of posture and also additionally tension on there, muscle tension, then of course you can get some of the impact, or alleviate, I think is the right word, some of the impact with the tension you build up in these muscles. Whereas if it is cramped and so forth, then you cannot get as much impact on the foot itself. So therefore your foot also changes from this to this, ideally at least. And therefore your foot also kind of grows. It doesn't really grow physically, but it grows because it changes posture. Similar to I am standing in a bad posture now, but if I do have a better posture, then at least I seem a little bit taller. In total, on a mental note, I switched to barefoot shoes now 1.5 years ago with the first pair of Vivobarefoot and also these. So I bought basically a complete set in order to then have a complete set of barefoot shoes. Then after quite some time I realized I needed a second pair. This is when I then bought a second pair, but only after actually quite a little bit of time, because I just didn't wear shoes inside, or I also had older shoes which I wore inside, which I kind of transformed into barefoot shoes. And then I only bought the second pair a few months ago actually, and ever since then I use them as my outdoor shoes. But of course also because I wanted to strategically still have these around, even though they otherwise would have degraded now to the level at which I couldn't use them anymore. But now I have the option. I have multiple pairs of shoes, and I also have super new shoes which I could wear to a super nice wedding, for example. Now, regarding the wedding, I also thought about getting the raw. So there are different shoes that look more like leathery shoes, and these are maybe not shoes you want to actually wear to a wedding, especially if they look like this. And this is kind of a problem I have realized. But on the other side, I don't want to have too many different pairs of shoes, because that also means I'm kind of need to maintain them and also physically keep them in terms of volume. This is something I want to keep in mind. In total, I think I made a very good decision with these barefoot shoes, and the decision is reinforced again and again by me buying now the third pair of Primus Lite 3 over the years. And I think it would be reasonable to expect that if you have one pair of Primus Lite 3, that you can wear them for about 1 year if you use them exclusively. And if you then add a second pair, then you can wear both for 2 years. So for this reason, having many pairs makes sense, but only up to the point where you don't have a lot of different shoes. And especially if it's the same model, and I think this is the most universal model you can get. There is also a version of this shoe that has a sole like this, but it doesn't come with laces, and I don't like the style of it, so therefore I didn't buy it. I also have these for hiking and for winter, and for days where the streets outside are skatable, ice skatable.